Most of the fat tire electrics I've tested so far have proven themselves capable of handling my rough road riding conditions so long as the rider shows a bit of restraint. However, only a few of them have shown to be well suited for my riding conditions, and this is one of them. Welcome back, riders. This is my detailed first impressions of the Basalt by Mokwheel, an electric fat tire hardtail with what looks to be the best build quality I've tested so far.
Other side?
This one right here. Do this side first. Mokwheel's Basalt has some subtle details about it which really complement this bike's ability to handle poor and very poor road conditions over an extended period of time. And holding nothing against my fellow city dwellers, but I feel these are details which would be underappreciated on smooth streets. It's not until you take the Basalt into the rough where it really starts to shine. Don't get me wrong, the Basalt actually has a pretty efficient footprint, making good use of the space it takes up. This efficiency only aids in its ability to handle tight situations and maneuver around obstacles. These handling characteristics do complement city riding, it's just that if that's all you're going to do, there are better options. It was when I got the bike off of paved streets which I started to realize this wasn't designed for city travel with a few lighthearted adventures in mind, but engineered to spend its entire life in the back roads. Without getting up to enthusiast level price categories, this one does carry a premium price tag, $1,800 at the time of recording. Thankfully, you do get what you pay for at that price tag. I wasn't able to find anything on the bike that screams deal breaker, issue, or corners cut with poor quality. With that out of the way, it's not all sugar-coated compliments. There are some things on this bike which I feel they could improve. And just in case any of these are deal breakers for you, I'm gonna get them out of the way first before we move on to what I like about this bike and where I think they got it right. My first complaint is a minor issue, but something which really should not have been overlooked, especially considering what this bike is designed and capable of doing. There's no USB charging port, at the very least to keep your phone topped off under long rides. For an adventure bike to not have a USB charging port, I don't understand it. My next complaint is more of a neutral thought, as this component on the bike still has benefits over what I've tested in the past, but unfortunately didn't act as I expected and was a bit of a letdown. Let me start by pointing out that this is the first bike I've ever tested with this kind of feature, and if I have any misconceptions about how these are supposed to operate, I do apologize. But it's just not what I expected. Where it is true that the Basalt does not use a cadence sensor, it has a torque sensor technically. I classify this more as a torque switch. I would expect a proper torque sensor to apply power to the motor proportional to how hard you're pedaling, and this power level could be manipulated by what level of pedal assist you're in. In a nutshell, you pedal harder, it applies more power. Unfortunately, on the Basalt, it doesn't seem to care how hard you're pedaling, simply if you're pedaling and if there is pressure on the pedals. It acts much like a cadence sensor, but much more responsive. I suspect a torque switch was used instead of a sensor to keep the price outside of enthusiast-grade equipment. On the plus side, it's still better than a cadence sensor in my opinion, applying instant motor power the moment you start pedaling and deactivating the moment you stop pedaling. That's the plus side. So you've basically got a much more responsive cadence sensor, and since that's all I've ever tested on bikes so far, I wouldn't have much to complain about here, except a lot of the benefits of having a true torque sensor are lost due to the next issue on the bike. There are no customizable pedal assist levels, and this wouldn't be a big deal if it was a proper torque sensor, but because you can't customize any of the levels, it makes low-speed operations while pedaling more cumbersome and less controllable. Basically, once you start pedaling in the lowest pedal assist level, the motor kicks in and it's just going to keep applying more power until you stop pedaling. On a torque sensor bike, you wouldn't need to customize the pedal assist levels because you would just pedal less and go slower, but on this bike, if you're pedaling at all, you're going to go faster. The good news is, on long stretches of paved or back roads, this never once affected me, but is one of the reasons why negotiating city traffic could be annoying. This next one's a bit of a spoiled nitpick for me, but it's annoying. The bike takes too long to turn on and off, having to hold the power button for at least 5 seconds before it'll activate, and then waiting about another 5 seconds before you can even activate pedal assist. It just seems a bit excessive to me. With my few negatives out of the way, let's go ahead and cover some neutral thoughts and basic specifications about the bike. The Basalt showed up as a Class 2 e-bike, and this doesn't really affect me in a positive or negative way. It means that the throttle is capped at a top speed of 20 miles an hour. Pedal assist will allow you to get up to 28, except the cadence on this bike I found is comfortable at about 22 miles an hour, but beyond that, you're just ghost pedaling. So whether or not you'd be able to get up to 28, I doubt it. The motor's rated at 750 watts, and that feels like a true rating, as I've had 750s that have felt like 1,000 and others that have felt like 500. This sits happily in the middle, always having a little bit more power than I need to get through all of my riding conditions, never leaving me in a situation where I needed to pedal and assist the bike. Anytime I'm pedaling this bike is simply because I feel like helping it out, but never because it's necessary. That being said, I'm in Louisiana. We don't have a lot of steep hills, but we do have a lot of boggy back roads. The bike utilizes a 48-volt power system and a generous 19.6 amp-hour battery, which is going to give this significant range. After owning the bike for a few months, in the final review video I will do its proper range test, but based off of other setups I've tested in the past, I'm expecting this battery to give me 50 miles of pedal assist range and 30 of full throttle operation. They claim 60 to 80 miles on their website, but I'm a fairly heavy rider, around 200 pounds, and my road conditions don't exactly complement long-range riding. Mokwheel has included an auxiliary power port on this bike, allowing it to hook up to a power inverter and solar charger, yet another reason this bike complements the adventure-oriented rider. However, I don't have these, so I can't test them. Most of these next features would normally be in a cheaper bike's positive category, but at this price tag they're expected, so I'm considering them to be basic specifications. Tektro full hydraulic brakes, front and rear, with 180mm rotors. They're only dual piston calipers, but have provided me with excellent stopping performance. A 7-speed Shimano derailleur with a push-pull trigger shifter. 7 speeds usually runs out of cadence on electric bikes, but on this one the gear ratio is happy at 20 miles an hour. We've got a fairly loud buzzer that's actually not too obnoxious. The tone is decent. The taillight's bright, gets even brighter when you pull the brakes. The headlight's bright and has long throw for good distance. The beam is not as narrow as some of the cheaper models I've tested, but I still would like to see a wider beam on this bike without sacrificing brightness, just to make it easier to see what's off to the side. They've opted to go with traditional spoked wheels, I assume to help keep the weight of the bike down. This does mean you won't have as much carefree maintenance down the road, having to occasionally keep an eye on your spokes and adjust them, but this isn't something new to bikes. This has been around for a long time. Alloy wheels have carefree maintenance properties about them, but they're a bit heavier. Their wheel set utilizes the much easier to deal with sealed bearings. Thank you. A message to any manufacturer who still utilizes cup and cone bearings in bike wheels: you are the person that nobody likes. Stop it. We've got full coverage fenders, which do a great job at keeping you clean, as most of these do on e-bikes. They are plastic, which means they don't rattle around and make a bunch of noise, and given how this bike's going to be ridden, that's a plus. So up until this point, most of what we talked about has been pretty standard stuff from what we've come to expect these days on these electric fat tire bikes. And to top it off, this is a hardtail, so no rear suspension. Where exactly are those subtle details that make this really good at being an adventure bike as compared to pretty much anything else we've tested? These are in no particular order, but try to stick with me because they add up to make this bike ride and feel premium. Starting with their Hippo Skin branded flat resistant tires, these have a thick hardened rubber outer layer underneath the soft rubber knobs, still giving you plenty of grip. At least I didn't have any issues, but being more resistant to punctures from things like goat heads, staples, and small screws and nails. Will it be resistant to a jagged piece of glass or a big roofing nail? Probably not, but having added protection already on the bike compared to anything else I've tested so far, that's a win. Also, I'd like to point out that these use a reflective coating around the entire circumference of the tire, making them very visible at night. The anti-corrosion chain, which I really need to start using on my gas bikes, is going to withstand neglect a lot better and be able to handle wet conditions more often. An area of electric bikes which is often overlooked by the manufacturer, especially on cheaper models, are the pass-throughs for cables and wires. Running your cables and wires through the frame of the bike is nice for a clean look, but it also helps to protect them from the outside environment. Snagging cables on branches is never a good thing. However, I've tested a handful of electric bikes which do not include rubber grommets on the pass-throughs to protect the cables and wires. Every time you turn the handlebars or hit a small bump in the road or just experience normal vibrations, it's slowly going to deteriorate the outer layer of the cables and wires. And this can take many thousands of miles before it becomes an issue, but when it does, it can happen suddenly and unexpected. I can only assume that companies which do not include these safety features aren't planning on being around long enough to deal with the consequences. Mokwheel including thick rubber grommets which are installed correctly shows that they plan on being around for quite some time. Earlier, during our basic specifications, we pointed out the Tektro brakes, Shimano shifter, and derailleur. These are used by many manufacturers because they're relatively cheap and they provide decent quality. As a matter of fact, on all my gas, electric, and pedal bikes, I've never had these give me an issue outside of being crashed and bent out of alignment. I bring this up because they're also using an adjustable zoom stem on the handlebars, which is great for tall and short riders to get the bars right where they need them, but I was happy to see that this locked in solid, and I've used zoom products, be it suspension seat post, front forks, hydraulic brakes, chain ring, crankset pedals, on my gas and electric bikes, and have never had a problem with a single one of their components. So if ridden within their limitations, I assume this will stay the same. And limitations is important. Although this is a premium bike in my opinion, it's not a mountain bike, so don't expect to take this on hard trails and impacts. Moving on with our pros about this bike, it has a really nice front fork. I don't recognize the brand, but these perform great. Whether or not they'll hold up in the extended long run is yet to be seen, but they offer really good dampening for this heavy bike over rough riding conditions. They have a lot of travel, and possibly the most I've tested on an electric so far. And as far as I can tell, they have some sort of rebound, because the front wheel will not clunk down when you crest a speed bump or go off a curb. Unlike on a lot of front forks where you try to adjust the dials and you just kind of assume they did something, you can actually feel the adjustments making a difference when you ride the bike. I'd also like to point out that as far as I can tell, these haven't bottomed out on me a single time, and I've pushed them quite a bit harder than most of my other bikes. I was able to find their full travel by adjusting them to their softest position and then pushing down suddenly, but under normal riding conditions, they just don't bottom out. An unexpected surprise in the construction quality of the seat. Now, as far as comfort goes, it's pretty average, being a good compromise between pedal assistance efficiency or motor-only comfort. However, it uses a slick coating, allowing you to make minor adjustments without sticking to the seat. You guys like me who have to ride in hot, humid environments know how annoying this can be under long rides, where you start to stick to your clothes and your clothes start to stick to the seat, making minor adjustments difficult. This just helps eliminate that, and I thought I'd point it out. The heads-up display is pretty easy to see as far as color displays are concerned. I still prefer a monochrome display because you can see those in any lighting conditions. This one does a good job for what it is. It gives a very clean and intuitive readout, as well as a more accurate battery bar indicator for long rides. Even the throttle on this bike was not overlooked. It has a thicker body and trigger, which means it's unlikely to break in a crash or if you get a little too enthusiastic during your ride and push down too hard. It also includes small ridges on the body of the throttle and the trigger, meaning that this company realizes people will roll their thumb down the body for precise adjustments. This is a detail which is nice to see. Thankfully, they've included cruise control. It's not implemented in the best way. It does have a good tune for accelerating and decelerating, so there's no pulsation, but unfortunately, you can't activate it while you're pedaling, and if you start pedaling while it's active, it turns off, which I find to be an unnecessary annoyance. But it does have one thing that none of the other electrics I've tested so far have, the ability to turn it on with a button, so you don't have to hold the throttle in a precise position for like 5 to 8 seconds, and if you don't want to use it, then it just won't turn on accidentally. You hold the down arrow for about 3 seconds, and wherever the throttle is, that's the speed it'll hold. This is great. More bikes should do this. I would prefer a dedicated button that I can just tap once and it would turn on, but this is still a step in the right direction. I realize that cruise control is not a big feature for a lot of people, especially in city environments where you're dealing with constant stop-and-go traffic. For me, dealing with long stretches of road, it's a pretty important feature. And to be blunt, I can criticize bikes for lack of customizable pedal assist features and other weird user interface features or lack thereof. As long as it has a decent cruise control system, I can overlook all that to the point where I just don't care. These little quality of life improvements help to give this bike a good feel and ride, but there was still something missing. These add up and they do their part, but I couldn't figure out why exactly this felt so good on the back roads, especially for a hardtail. You would think that my full suspension bikes would be more capable of withstanding this kind of abuse for a longer period of time, but there was still something missing and I just couldn't figure out what it was until about a week ago I realized, where are the welds on this frame? Now, I know basically nothing about frame manufacturing. Maybe they're there, polished down to a mirror finish and then painted over. Maybe there's a subframe underneath the main frame. I don't know. Whatever they've done to manufacture this bike makes it look really smooth, slick, and it feels tight when you're riding it. Very controllable and stable. Not only that, but when I'm riding over the rough conditions, the only noise I hear from this bike is the kickstand bouncing up and down under hard bumps. This thing is smooth, even in the worst conditions. As many of my returning viewers will know, the long-term review, which is in progress and can take many months, will always tell the truth about a bike and how well it stands up to expectations. And although my opinion may change in the future, as of right now, with the 3 weeks I've spent on this bike, I can say that for an adventure-based rider, somebody with terrible road conditions, wants to ride light trails and back roads all the time, this is a great sub-$2,000 bike. It's one of the best I've tested. I can't say it's the best because for specific applications, other bikes perform better, but for just straight-up adventure riding, this one is great. City dwellers probably won't see much use with a bike like this, as they can't really appreciate its full potential. The ability to have solar charging and a power inverter hooked up in the future, if you decide to go with that, really helps double down on its adventure riding orientation. The lack of USB charging, they should really deal with that before pumping out more models. And the funky torque sensor, which is still hard to complain about because it's better than any cadence sensor I've tested, could use some work. But those few complaints are simply dwarfed by pretty much every other positive aspect on this bike. It's still a hardtail, so it's not going to give you the smoothest ride, which means for older individuals or anyone who just doesn't want to deal with bumps and jitters on the back roads, they might look elsewhere for more expensive options. But for a hardtail, this is very stable and does a really good job on the back roads. Speed demons are not going to be impressed by this bike with its 20-mile-an-hour top speed on the throttle, and usually those individuals don't care about pedaling to get it to go faster. If you're just out to enjoy the ride, I find 20 miles an hour to be more than adequate, and that's usually about what I ride on most other electric bikes, even if they can go faster. As for my message to Mokwheel, you guys built a good bike. I saw the higher price tag compared to what I'm used to, and I expected a few higher quality components, maybe a little more power, which ironically this bike doesn't have a whole lot of power compared to other ones, but because the features come together so well, and the little details like the rubber grommets for long-term protection on the cables, the slick seat for humid environment riding, the hippo skin puncture-resistant tire, these just add up to show your consumers that you're actually riding your bikes and testing them, so good job. I hope you guys got some useful information out of today's video, or at the very least were mildly entertained. And until next time, ride safe.